Oh, Kathleen Sebelius, yeah. Hi, we're going to start. Actually, I'm saving that for Chris because I wanted Woodward's view on the coverage of Sebelius and the numbers and the fact that Ovik Roy is reporting via the RAND Corporation that 1.4 million to 2 million, and that's the highest end, believing what the CBO oftentimes has to assume, the most rosy projections of the 7 point, is it 5 million now? That's what they're up to, right? Yeah, that were previously uninsured. So the 5 to 6 million that had insurance and lost their insurance, and so it's kind of a wash in that way. You say, don't you care about having people have access to quality health care? And I say, do you really believe that I don't care about people having quality access to health care because I don't support a takeover, a further takeover of our healthcare system? Do you really believe that? Because if you believe that, and that's what the left says, not you per se, but if you believe that, if you believe when I look at entitlement programs and I say, I think we should end them by giving people their money and allowing us to be the stewards over our funds, especially when it comes to our health care in our most vulnerable years and our retirement money. And people, I'll get emails saying I'm heartless. Now, I could come back with a bunch of little one-liners like, well, I do have a heart, but you don't have a brain. But I think it goes much deeper than that. I think, and this is why you need to put Christ first. Crane, yeah, thank you. Was that Captain Obvious? No, no, it was not. Because it's not always obvious. It should be, but it's not. Because what I feel those people are doing is they're wrapped into the debate so much that their emotion takes over. And their emotion takes over and blinds them and has them have some knee-jerk response to say that because I don't want the government to do it, I don't want it done. And there are so many things I could say specifically to that, how ridiculous that is. But that's the idea. And if you've gotten 40 plus years, and arguably more, of statism being pushed and pushed and pushed, and that's the way the debate is characterized. If the government doesn't do it, well, you don't want it done. And you demonize industry, private enterprise, people using their godly gifts to provide a good or a service. And wow, freedom does work, and the allocation of resources is the most productive. You're going to further those. You're going to maximize those. Central planning doesn't work. I thought we learned that when communism fell, but occasionally people try to rewrite history and say, oh, it was Gorbachev who really won the war, was responsible for the war. No, actually, it was Reagan's policies that pushed them to bankruptcy. They couldn't compete. They couldn't deal. They didn't have the economic resources to do so, and they collapsed. But it was also a combination of a moral argument, yes, moral argument being made against the state, the communist state. Now, socialism is socialism is an economic system. We have communism is the political system that it can, through socialist policies, because of the intervention into the state and growing dependence on the state, be morphed into that, to that type of political system. I would merely suggest that we are no longer looking down the road and seeing a lot of road. We're seeing a cliff, and it will collapse. Don't demonize those who are telling you the truth about the cliff. Don't demonize those who are telling you the truth about the promise that cannot be met because we don't have the resources to do so. Don't tell people, unless, of course, you want to enslave others and the next generation to the state even more. That's what's happening. And that's the left's argument. It's all about demonization. Now, you think I'm wrong. You think, Crane, it's not all about demonization. How could it be all about demonization? Well, let's go to some examples, because they're not making a rational case for it. not rational appeals here. They're actually appeals based on emotional. 2/3 to 1/3 when it comes to emotional appeals versus rational appeals. Boring. This is not boring. I know it's Friday. Happy Friday. I'm great with you. I want to drill down on this. I want to make a point on this because you're going to get a lot as the left grows more and more desperate to defend failure and actually attempt to legislate and push and power grab more. They're going to be more hysterical with their appeals. And that's sad. But I give you cut number 5. Yeah, it's Nancy Pelosi. And she is asked about Eric Holder and his comments that we will talk about with Chris Woodward. But Eric Holder went to the National Action Network. You mean Al Sharpton's thing? Yeah. The fact that we even have a conversation that Al Sharpton is a place where the Attorney General would sit at the dais, on the dais with him, and the president would as well, should tell you how poisoned and ridiculous that you have a race hustler now alleged. Well, he's had some dealings, but that's not the problem. Look what he's done in the past, riots and the blood and the false accusations and the all of this alleged, but you can get there. Shaul Yeshikol, I believe, is the rabbinical student who was killed through, well, he likes to stir things up, doesn't he? Tawana Borali. I mean, we can talk about these things. That all said, here is Nancy Pelosi being asked about Eric Holder saying that Gohmert's response to him, and that interaction was, she didn't see much of it, but she knows it's about race because Republicans are racist. And then she goes into immigration. Roll it.
Yesterday, so I didn't see what the exchange was that provoked that remark. It's a very difficult subject to talk about. I think race has something to do with the fact that they're not bringing up an immigration bill. I've heard them say to the Irish, for just you, this would be easy. I think that, generally speaking, they are disrespectful of the representatives of the president's administration. So I don't really want to go to that place. I would just say that their disdain for anybody who disagrees with them is pretty across the board. And I don't want to go to the race piece, but I think it certainly applies to women. It's so self-evident that it applies to women. So I think that, but, you know, in other words, I don't want to be distracted. The fact is we have to talk about how we create jobs in our country, how we build an economy that works for everyone. I always say when people, and God knows I've been the brunt of a lot of it, it's their problem. Whatever it is, it's their problem. Ignore them. Show them how unimportant they are. If they have a problem with race or women or whatever, it's their problem. They're on the wrong side, not only of history, but on the wrong side of the future.
In one of the comments that she made, she actually was speaking to the fact of how, and here, this is unbelievable, but she was referencing the fact that she heard Republicans tell the Irish that there would be no opposition from the right if immigration was about them, making that statement. Phaedra Dugan from the American Thinker points this out today. And she was called on it. You see, they'll lie. They'll say something that is not true. They'll say, oh, yeah, it was just for white guys. Irish, yeah. Then we wouldn't have a problem with immigration. That's what I heard the Republicans say. They get called out on this. Women's statistics on women and wage gap, we're going to cover that. They've been called to account even by the mainstream media on that. We'll get Chris Woodward's thoughts on it. Here's my point. They have to invent hate to exploit how we all feel about hate. And why would they do this if they are actually solving the problems or had the solutions for them? Why would they do that? That's what I ask you. Why did they have to play the game? 7.5, 7.6, 8 million, whatever. How many uninsured? How many people lost? Oh, 1.4 to 2 million. Now Rand study says that. Ovik Roy's article in Forbes the other day. Here's the point. You have to invent things. See, we can go back and forth about intentions and trying to help, because we are called to help. Certainly the Lord calls us to help. But if we're going to sit back and have a conversation based on compassion, do you measure compassion with exploitation and exacerbating a problem and growing the problem through a federal bureaucracy, or to gain political points through identity politics? Or do you measure compassion by fixing a problem? It's a pretty obvious case here. And that's why I'm optimistic. That's why I'm looking at this going, liberalism has failed. When you have an agenda that is anti-life, denies the beautiful differences between men and women. Oh, they're beautiful differences. And you want to recognize racism by having to make things up to exploit what we all can't stand. There's a time clock on it. Nancy Pelosi, your time is up. The truth has got you. AFR Talk.